Hey everyone, welcome to this session. I'm excited to be here. Thanks to Video Creator University for having me. I'm excited, of course, as always, to talk about Final Cut Pro, and it's great to have all of you here from Connecticut, Seattle. Chris, I grew up in Chicagoland, so good to see a fellow Chicagoan in the VCU situation. So we're going to go over a pretty in-depth look at how I prep my videos for Final Cut Pro. We're going to take a look just real quick at a session agenda covering the major phases of the setup or assistant editing process for a video that is primarily A-roll. I'm going to do a pretty simple, let me throw some picture up. I'm going to do and Chris, are we getting the screen? I'm just seeing that logo there. Is that feed coming through?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to do just a simple setup with just some A-roll. I'm not going to have a bunch of B-roll and screen recordings and a ton of stuff that I typically have in my videos. We're going to focus mainly on how I set up my A-roll. We're going to take a close look at some of the tricks and ancillary apps that I use to prep my edits. And then we're going to talk about doing things that are tedious in prep to save time and maintain the coveted creative flow when you're editing, revising, and polishing, which to me is the most fun part of the editing process. And I talk a lot on my YouTube channel about the creative flow and why I love Final Cut Pro so much for helping me to stay in the creative flow when I'm editing. I'm not being broken out of it to deal with technical issues or crashing, things like that. And the magnetic timeline certainly goes a long way to helping with that as well. Before we dive into all of that, I just want you to know when showing my workflow, not like a big disclaimer, but I don't want you to think that my way of prepping my video is the end-all be-all method for prepping your footage for a YouTube video for editing. It is okay if you prefer a different method, but be aware of any inefficiencies or risks it creates in your workflow. And for those of you who make different kinds of videos than mine that I make on my YouTube channel, perhaps look to this as a source of inspiration. How can you maybe adapt some of the ideas that I'm implementing into my workflow into your own workflows? So we're going to just look at the major phases of prep. I just sort of name this stuff myself. It's the media organization, which primarily takes place in Finder for me, especially with how I use Final Cut Pro, where I have Final Cut Pro reference all my files in Finder versus storing them inside the Final Cut Pro library. Importing media, of course, is a major phase of prep, and then preparing your media in Final Cut Pro for the edit process. Media organization. When I talk about that, what I'm talking about is setting up your Finder folder template and Final Cut Pro library template. That might be a new concept to some of you, and you'll see why I use templates to get the editing process started a lot faster. We'll talk about media organization with regards to copying media to your drive and renaming files during that process. So before we get into starting the process of setting up, I want to put a poll out there asking, how would you describe your media organization, whether it's with your YouTube content, your client work, and things like that. And then after about a minute or so, Chris will let me know that we've got some results, and we'll get into those results and take a look at what you guys think. And be honest, it's okay if you're a little messy, if you're a little disorganized. But I'm a big advocate of that media organization up front, and how that can really save you time later on in the edit, especially when you're pulling things from your archives. Okay, so before we get started, let's just go ahead and see what the poll results are and chat about that a little bit. Okay, so we've got 36% saying they're hyper organized, which is what I consider myself hyper organized. About 64%, I usually put stuff in folders. And then nobody, fortunately, saying just toss it on the desktop and deal with it later. So that's really great. So we're going to take a look. We're right now in Finder. I'm going to try to track my picture in picture here so I'm not blocking anything that's important for you to see. But I'm in Finder, which is where the process is going to begin with importing my media from my camera or my audio recorder or both. Now, I'm going to act like this footage is already on my hard drive, so we don't have to sit and wait for footage to import. So we're going to treat this audio folder as the external audio. We're going to treat the C300 Mark II as my A-roll that I recorded with audio running through my camera. So audio is synced to picture. And then for another part of this video that I recorded using my EOS R with separate audio, so I can show you how I prep my project when I record with my EOS R and audio separate, and my C300 with audio already synced to picture. So the first thing that I do is I'm going to create a new folder here, and I'm going to name it using my naming structure. So let's just say that this is episode 183 on my YouTube channel, and then the date being 2022 and August. And we're just going to call this tips for Final Cut Pro. Okay. Now there's an important step that happens next, and that step is using what I call my Finder folder template. So what a lot of us do when we go to import footage is we start creating a bunch of folders every time for audio, for video, and we have to go through that process every single time we make a new video. And a friend of mine said, "Why do you do that every time?" Because he was looking over my shoulder, and this is years and years ago. And I'm like, "Isn't that just what you do to set up a project?" And he's like, "Well, why don't you just have a folder template that has all of the folders ready to go, and all you have to do is copy and paste them into your new project?" So that's what I started doing, because he saw my workflow, saw that there was a serious inefficiency, and then I could speed it up pretty dramatically this way. So I have a Finder folder template that I use, and it contains a documents folder, projects folder, a media folder, a folder for my thumbnail media, and then a finals, which is what my final video export is. Now this folder structure is unique to my YouTube videos. I use a different folder structure for some of my client work, but this folder structure works really well. So in project files, I've got Final Cut Pro, and I've got a library template, which I'll get into in a moment. And then under media, I have all the different types of media that I use to make a YouTube video. Audio, content, which is like sometimes I rip the Apple event from YouTube and use that to reference in my video. I have film, graphics, screen recordings, and stills. And film is the most important. We're going to have an A-roll folder and a B-roll folder. And then under B-roll, I usually have the different camera systems I have. So it's pretty extensive folder structure. And all I do to import this footage is I'm going to go to that first camera card. Let's say it's I put my SD card in for my audio, and I go to the corresponding folder here. This is my location audio, which is a little bit of an echo of my film school days. I still kind of use some of that wording in my naming. And I'm just going to drag and drop that over there. Now this is moving it from one window to the other. Normally it would just copy it over, but because I'm working out of the same folder, it's going to do that, which is fine. So then I have my C300 footage, and I'm going to go to my film folder and then A-roll, and then I'm going to copy this over here. And then I have an EOS R angle, and I'm going to drag this over here. So that's the first step, getting everything off of the SD cards, and for me into Finder in an organized way, because again, I'm not going to store my media in the Final Cut library. If we switch back to the keynote, we can see, let's just double check. Okay, so we're not there yet. We have this phase here where I'm renaming my files. So what I do there typically is I use an app called A Better Finder Rename. Now, Finder itself can rename files, but I've really adapted to using this app for the basic needs of batch renaming files. This is great. It also does some other high-powered things that Finder can't do. So what I typically do is I rename my files with my episode number, which I think was 183, if I remember correctly. And then I'll put a summary of what that episode was, which would say, let's just say 5 tips FCP, and then underscore. And then the first thing that we're going to rename is the audio file. So I'll say audio, I'll say Matthew, and then I'll say boom, and then leave it like this. And I'm going to double check that this is set to 1. Now you might be saying to yourself, man, this is a lot of work to just get your project up and running. Why do you rename your files? There's two reasons I rename my files. One reason is because when I search my archives, having all of this information on the file names makes it a lot easier to isolate specific things in my archives. And secondly, I use smart collections in Final Cut Pro, and those smart collections allow me to program certain files routing to smart collections based on the file name. And we'll take a look at that once we get into Final Cut. So now to perform the rename, I just hit enter and then Command R to rename all. Typically I have several audio files, and then especially with video, I have numerous video files. So we're going to clear that out now and move on to the A roll that I'm going to rename. And we'll drag this in, and then I'm going to change this to A roll, and then it's Matthew, and then I type in C300 Mark II, and then we'll go ahead and rename that. And now that's been renamed. And again, this feels like overkill because I'm just renaming one file at a time, but typically I have multiple files, especially with my B-roll. And if I have 20 shots of B-roll, it renames all 20 shots all in one shot. So then this is just going to switch to EOS R, and then we'll hit enter and rename it. And now all those files are renamed so that they're more compatible with my smart collections in Final Cut Pro. So this again is a Better Finder rename. It's a great app. It's a standalone app that you can purchase. I can't remember how much it was. I've had it for years, so I'm forgetting how much it was, but it's definitely something to check out if you're interested in doing some pretty extensive renaming of files. Now, when I do client work and I have a cinematographer and we use my C300 Mark II and all that stuff, I do not rename my files, especially if we're doing color turnover. If I need to get something from Final Cut into DaVinci Resolve, I always keep my original media, the name of whatever it was from the camera. And I set my custom names in camera so that I know what roll it was, what scene number it was, what clip number it was, etc. So the next thing that we want to do, and if anybody has any big questions, yeah. Okay. I can see, can you increase text size? It's too small to screen. Oh no, the screen's too small. Well, here, I'm just going to really try to use this magnifying glass when necessary so that you guys can see this a little bit better. Let's see here. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to rename my Final Cut Pro library template. And what this is a Final Cut Pro library template that contains all of the event and smart collection organization ready to go, just like my Finder template. So I'm just going to rename this 183 and call it Final Cut Pro Tips. And then I'm going to double click it to open it. And this is an older template. I keep it that way. It's a long story. I won't get into it. But we now have my Final Cut Pro library ready to go. And you can see over here, I've got, I don't know if this magnifying glass makes it better or worse on the edges of screen, but I've got all these events. And this is where you might say to yourself, well, I don't want it all in separate events. I'd rather have it in folders. Do what works best for you. For me, I really like having the different types of media that I create for a project in different events. So in this library template, I already have some projects that are empty that I can populate with my, sorry, I'm in the wrong ones. My bad. I already have some projects that are untitled and set to what I need them to be set to. Then in the footage template, all this stuff is empty, but I have smart collections for all of the stuff that I do. Let's see here. I'm just going to caret these down. And so, for instance, this smart collection set to B-roll, it says that any file that comes in with the label B-roll is going to automatically go into this smart collection. And same thing with my A-roll. Any clip that says Matthew, which all my A-roll clips do, it's going to filter that clip automatically into this smart collection. Let's just call this A-roll so that we're all on the same page with what we've got going on. Sometimes I use smart collections for the other media, but for the most part, I just leave them as keyword collections. But that's what this Final Cut Pro library template allows for. It allows for you to have all of this media organization ready to go at the top of your edit. So you're not every single time you create a new Final Cut Pro library, setting up every event, every folder, every smart collection, every keyword collection. Now, one thing, if you're if you're at all working in a pro workflow where it's television, film, documentary, you don't want to use templates, because within Final Cut Pro, there's like a unique identifier number inside the database. And that can cause issues when you're working on really high-end workflows with complex turnaround or turnover, I'm sorry. So be wary of that. But with my YouTube channel, this is stuff that I just turn and burn quickly. I'm not sending things off to sound, visual effects, color, all that kind of stuff. So it's okay if that unique identifier number inside the Final Cut library is the same for every single library I work on, okay? So let's switch back to this real quick and get into the next phase of the process. The first thing that we're gonna do is review some of the Final Cut Pro import settings. So what we wanna go over here is up in Preferences, we're going to look at the Import tab. You can see that here. And we want to make sure that Create Optimized Media and Create Proxy Media is unchecked. Now, there are times where you consciously want to create optimized media or proxy media. I don't think that that workflow often happens with YouTube, but if you have an older Mac and you need to work with proxy media because your 10-bit Sony 4K footage is too resource intensive, you can certainly look at creating optimized media and proxy media for that. But for the most part, I leave those unchecked. And then leave files in place. I leave files in place because I like to reference my files in a Finder location. I don't like to copy them into the Final Cut Pro library. If you're someone who does like to copy things into the Final Cut Pro library, so about relinking, more power to you. Certainly stick with what works for you. Then when we go to the playback page, there's another thing here called Create Optimized Media for Multicam Clips. I always make sure this is checked off because I use a multicam method of editing my A-roll, and I don't want it to take my 4K C300 footage and then turn it into 4K ProRes footage so that I can have better playback for my multicams. The spirit of this feature is really for like big events where you have 5, 6, 7 cameras, and it's just too much work for your computer to stream all of those streams in the multicam viewer in Final Cut Pro. So I make sure that that's unchecked. Let's just double check on the keynote. We talked about the Final Cut Pro library template, and we talked about importing media into smart collections. So let's go ahead and import some media. And I use the drag and drop method from Finder. And I don't go through the process of going through the import media. For whatever reason, I've just always done it this way with Final Cut Pro and Finder, and that's just what I prefer to do. So in Finder, or Final Cut Pro, I'm gonna switch to my audio, which is where? Do I not have it in there? Oh yeah, oh, no, let's do this. For some reason, I don't have an audio event. I think I'm using an older template. And let's go, boom, okay. So I'm gonna drag this into that new event. And now we have our audio in. I'm gonna change my view settings here to just the clip view. And I had mentioned in the keynote assigning roles. So roles, let's say this is a voiceover track or this is a music track. I always make sure that if I bring sound effects in, if I bring a voiceover track in, if I bring music in, that I assign a role to it. And if I don't have like a voiceover role, I'll just go ahead and create one and call it voiceover and then hit apply. And the roles help me not only visually get a better understanding of what all my audio components are, but it really helps if you ever do sound turnover, or if you just want to export, you want to tweak something with your audio, you just want to export dialogue, or you just want to export sound effects, or you just want to export music. So it's really important to assign roles, especially to audio, as you bring your stuff in. Then we're going to switch over to the footage. Oh, there's my audio event. I don't know what I'm thinking. I can't see. See, this is what happens when you do like a seminar. Like you just like, you just like can't see things properly. It's so weird that this happens. Like I can't even, so we're going to move that event to the trash because we don't need it. Okay. Now let's import some footage here. So film and then A-roll and then this, and then we're going to make sure that we're in the footage event and drag this over. And I'm doing them one at a time. For the footage, typically, I would just drag both files in simultaneously and it would direct to the correct smart collection. But I just kind of want to drive home this process. Now you can see on import my C300 footage, Final Cut automatically applied a Canon Log 3 LUT, but my EOS R, which shoots in Canon Log, did not apply a LUT. So we're not going to worry about that too much. But one thing that I like to do in this part of the process in the browser is set my spatial conform. And I'm going to set my spatial conform to fill. Now the reason that I do that, on my C300 Mark II, I shoot in 4K DCI, 4096 by 4096. I can't remember DCI. Someone in chat tell me what DCI is. And then on the EOS R, it only records in UHD, which is 3860 by 38 something by 2160. Man, I'm forgetting my resolutions here. Well, let's just look. The inspector will tell us info, and my picture in picture is covering it right now. But yeah, 4096 by 2160, and then 3840 by 2160. So I set the spatial conform to fill because I'm gonna do all my videos in a 4K 2:1 aspect ratio, so it looks a little bit better on my iPhone. And that aspect ratio is 4096 by 2048. So I don't have black bars on the side of my image. I want Final Cut to just make that image fill the entire time, or the entire viewer window. So that's why I set the spatial conform that way. Okay, so let's double check. So yeah, this brings up the next poll, and the poll is, how do you import your media into Final Cut Pro? I think the answers that I give are, yeah, do you use the import media window, or are you a drag and dropper from Finder like I am? So I'm just gonna get this project prepped. So what I do now is I'm gonna double check the resolution, 4096, but I actually shoot everything in 24. So I'm gonna change that, and I'm gonna call this 183 Final Cut Pro Tips Rough Edit V1. Now, usually I don't duplicate my timelines a ton in Final Cut Pro when I'm editing a video for YouTube, unless there's a client involved, a sponsored video. Then that naming structure really comes in to help, because I can do Rough Edit V2, Rough Edit V3, and then because I have these smart collections with Rough Edit, Color Grade, and Final Edit, if I need all the rough edits to be in one place, a color grade, like if I was going to send this out to a colorist in another, and then my final edit, I can just access those things when I name them based on what the smart collections want. Okay, let's see here. So here I talked about spatial conform. Oh, we got our poll here. So we got 8 out of 10 use the import media window, which is great. And then 2 out of 10 drag and drop from Finder. It is a little bit clunkier sometimes to drag and drop from Finder, especially if you're not using the app switcher like I do. And the app switcher, again, is just, you're not seeing it pop up because it's on my other monitor, but it's a command tab that allows you to quickly switch between apps. So that's cool. Thanks for answering that poll. Good to know sort of where everybody sits with that. So preparing media for edit, we talked about spatial conform. If your audio is synced to picture and camera, we'll get to this in a second. We're going to adjust our audio as needed. And if your audio is recorded separately from picture, we're going to sync picture and audio by making synchronized clips. So let's go ahead and look at that, right? So let me just open my project here. So we have an empty timeline, so we're not distracted by that other timeline. So we have my 2 clips here that were recorded, and let's go ahead and take the view option, and we're going to show the waveforms. And what we have here is a mistake that I made where I did not turn the microphone on that was on my camera. Now, usually there's some scratch audio on the camera. I had a shotgun mic on there, but I forgot to turn it on, synchronized clip. But I believe I slated, so we'll be able to use that. Okay. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to address the audio on my C300 Mark II A-roll. So I'm going to go to the, let's actually move this up here. I'm going to go to the audio pane on in the inspector. And this is not something that the average YouTuber typically has going on with their camera. My camera records 4 channels of audio, 2 sets of dual mono. So I'm going to change this to 2 stereo and uncheck Dialogue 2 so that I only have my boom mic audio, not the scratch audio from the camera's onboard monaural microphone. So this is just a quick thing. Most of you aren't going to have to do this to get your audio set, but I do. So what I'm going to do with this clip, because my audio synced, is I'm just going to directly make a multi-clip, and you'll see why I do this process in just a bit. I'm going to call this Matthew C300 Mark II multi. All right, and we're going to double check our settings. Remember, I export this video as a 2:1 aspect ratio, so 4096 by 2048, and that makes it look a little bit more full screen on an iPhone for my YouTube viewers, okay? And I want to put this in the footage event, so then we're going to hit OK, and that multicam is going to get made and show up here because it's named Matthew. Now for this one, I need to make a synchronized clip, and I'm going to click up at the library level so I can access the footage and the audio clip at the same time. And then I'm going to right click this, and I'm going to first make a synchronized clip. So we're going to call this Matthew EOS R sync, and then hit OK. And it's going to make that pretty quickly because it doesn't have the audio that it can reference. But I'm going to double check to see if I slated, and hopefully I did. And if not, we're just going to treat it as if I did. So there's my slate. And then my slate, so I'm going to zoom in on this, and I'm going to drop a marker on it. Then zoom back out, and I can see my slate here on my audio, and we're going to get these all lined up. Got a little bit of headroom on here that I don't need, and we're going to get that audio right there on the mark. And so then if we play this back, and forgive me if this is at all loud, but 5 plugins for Final. So let's check our audio levels. I'm probably not going to be hearing it because, yeah, this is pretty quiet. Okay, so we're good there. We're all synced up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that synchronized clip, and I am going to make a multicam out of that. So now we'll do new multicam clip, call this Matthew EOS R multi, and we'll change this to 4096 by 2048 because this is a UHD clip, and then hit OK. And now we have our 2 multicam clips. All right. Now I'm not gonna progress anymore in the video with this EOS R angle because I wanted to show you how to do the process up to this point when you have a video that's recorded separately from your audio. But I'm gonna proceed with my C300 clip because I have the audio synced to picture in camera, okay? So we're gonna go in here, and now I have this multicam clip. You might be asking yourself, why are you going to this length of making a multicam clip? What is the big deal? The reason that I'm doing this is because in my YouTube videos, and I'm sure with all of you watching YouTube, you may know that a lot of people jump cut back and forth between a wide angle and a close angle. And usually that close angle is made out of the wide angle. They scale it up in order to make a sort of fake second angle, because YouTube videos have this sort of language about them where they're very cutty and, like have really tight editing, and jump cuts don't really bother people. Well, I don't want to have a timeline with my A-roll clip all bladed up, and then I'm having to copy and paste my scale effect to all these clips throughout the timeline to make that second angle. So what I do is I rename this close, and then I add a second angle, and I call it wide. Or actually, let's do the reverse. I'm sorry. We'll do this one as the wide and this one as the close. And then I'll just option drag this. It's going to go crazy with the magnifying glass, so bear with me here while I drag this. And I'm going to switch to the position tool and just make sure that these are all lined up and perfectly in sync. Okay, so now I have these 2 angles in the multicam. Well, now what I want to do is go back out to the main timeline, and I'm just going to take a small portion of this multicam clip and drop it in. And let's see here. Okay, so let's just bring that in, and then I'm going to duplicate this so that it's on top of the other clip. And now I'm going to go into the inspector, and let's see. Yep, I'm in the top left. Okay, now I'm going to go into the inspector, and I'm going to start scaling this second clip up to make for a second angle. And we'll Shift T, kind of get this position close to where the other angle is. And then I drop the opacity, and I try to get my body, my eyes in the relatively same space here. And then we'll hit done, and we'll change the opacity back to full, and we'll kind of get a look at how this looks, right? So, cutting back and forth between those two angles doesn't look too terrible. I think it looks pretty good. We all know it's a jump cut, but that's just kind of the thing with YouTube. So now that I have these adjustments, I love the freeze frames that you get with your face when you do these. So what I do now is I'm going to copy the settings from that clip, and I'm going to go inside the multicam. I can just double click it, I suppose. And I'm going to paste it to the secondary angle, the position and scale information. Okay. So now I have this wide angle, and now I have this close angle. And what does that allow me to do? This allows me, as I'm going through my A-roll edit, let's say I'm listening along and I want to cut a part out. Well, I want to cut this out. Okay, but now I have like a little blip, right? And I want to make this my secondary angle. So I'm going to use, I hope I remember this keyboard shortcut, Command Shift right arrow. Yeah. So I'm going to switch the angle to that close angle, right? Now, some of you might be saying, why use the keyboard shortcut Command Shift right arrow to switch the video angle of your multicam? Why not just use the number key, the number 2, and it'll automatically blade it and switch it? The reason I don't do that is because, and I'll back up a little bit, when I do my A-roll cut down, I don't do any of the angle changes when I'm doing my A-roll cut down. Your A-roll cut down is you cut out dead air, you cut out bad takes, you get that A-roll as tight as possible so it's as close to what it's going to be for the final video as possible, right? Let me just move my picture in picture. And so what I do is I make all of those cuts to my A-roll, get it condensed down to just what it needs to be. Then I layer in my B-roll or my screen recordings, any other additional footage or coverage that's going to cover up my A-roll. And then when I think I'm really close to having a final edit, then I'll use the Command Shift right arrow to go to switch the angles as needed with my multicam, okay? Now I have my Command Shift right angle or right arrow and Command Shift left arrow because this keyboard shortcut cycles through your video angles. I have that programmed to my Stream Deck mobile on my iPad, so it's just one button push to switch those angles, and that works really well for me when I'm doing that sort of that final pass of my edit and switching the angles. Now, on occasion, I will switch the angles early because I kind of need to see the angle switches to get a better sense of the edit, to get a better sense of what this video is, and if something needs to be cut or tightened even more, okay? Now, something else that we talked about, and certainly if anybody has any questions, please drop anything in the Q&A. I don't want to blow by all this stuff. So we covered this. Your audio is recorded separately from picture. We make a multicam out of your A-roll clips, and this is part of the phase of preparing your media for the actual edit. We talked about roles. If you have score or voiceover or sound effects, you want to assign those roles. And the next thing we're going to talk about is enhancing your audio. And this is another argument for the multicam clip. So when we go into the multicam, there's some audio enhancements that we typically need to do. An expander, a compressor, a limiter, a channel EQ. Now, I have actually saved all of those as an effects preset, and I'll pull that up now. I call it dialogue audio, okay? And if I drag and drop this onto my clip, you can see the waveform changes a little bit, and I'm going to drop my picture-in-picture back to the top left, and then if we go to the audio pane in the inspector, you can see I've got some of these effects. Let's get rid of the effects browser, make that full screen. You can see I've got a compressor and a limiter, okay? Now these are just set with some presets here. And this is information, these audio presets I actually got from Caleb over at DSLR Video Shooter, and I applied it to my workflow. So, like there's, what is that? The knee, the attack, the threshold, the ratio, the release. These are all, sophisticated things for audio people. I just copied what somebody else did because I'm not that great with audio. And then I have a limiter, and what I'll typically do is I'll bring this limiter down to 3 sometimes just to get the audio at a little bit of a better level. But I start with -6 in case I recorded, too hot, whatever the case may be. Now, some other effects that I'll sometimes use is a channel EQ, and I'm not going to go through how I do that. Let me just drop it on and pull up the visualizer. The channel EQ, I'll usually play it back, and then I do that frequency hunting thing where you move each frequency back and forth until you hear the most sort of distortion of the vocal, and then you drop that little bit of the frequency down and make it all narrow and skinny. That's a whole separate session, that we would cover. But I just wanted you guys to know that I typically do a compressor, a limiter, channel EQ, and sometimes I'll do an expander if there's like a noise floor that I need to push down even more than what the compressor does. But I'm not an audio expert, but those are some of the tools that I use for audio. And what that means is if you need to go back, let's say you're listening to your video and you've got it all cut up and you're like, my vocals are a little quiet. Instead of going to every single clip or selecting every single clip and bumping the vocals up, all you have to do is go into the multicam and bring your vocals up, a decibel or two. And then when you go back out, those changes are applied across your entire edit. And the same applies for color grading. I'm not going to go into color grading right now. Typically, when I do this process of my edit, I just leave the LUT on, and then it isn't until I'm close to picture lock that I do my color grading. Now, sometimes in the multicam, I'll just do a film convert nitrate film emulation and do some tweaks. Sometimes I'll leave this LUT on and do some adjustments to it. Sometimes I'll use a custom LUT like the one I'm using for this stream right now. And then I'll make some adjustments to that custom LUT. But the idea of the multicam is very similar to a compound clip, but you get just a lot more flexibility by editing your A-roll inside a multicam. Now, there is a little bit of a bug that's going on right now with Final Cut, and I will caution you. I've been editing my A-roll clips with a multicam method for a long time. And I've been hearing recently when I blade a multicam clip, there's been some little audio blips and crackles on that blade point. I don't know what's causing it, and it's something that I think is happening frequently enough, and I've heard it from a few other people that I might bring it up to Apple. But, because I just pick up the phone and call Tim Cook, we're tight, we're bros. But you might get frustrated with this method. I'm working on some workarounds and some things that I can do to adjust it, but they haven't been so bad that it's made me go, I'm not going to use the multicam method. Okay. Let's just take a peek at that keynote again and make sure we're on track. So just again, preparing the media for the edit. We're going to add an angle to the multicam and duplicate your A-roll clip to place it in as a second angle. We did the part where you adjust the clip, the scaling and positioning so you can make that second angle and then copy and paste those adjustments. You can apply a LUT to your footage, and we can see here it did it by default. If we go into the settings view, no, was it settings? General? Which one is it? Oh yeah, here it is. So Canon Log 3 is applied automatically. Thanks Final Cut for, saving me some steps. Some people get frustrated by that. They don't want a LUT, but Final Cut does it for you anyway. And then you add your multicam clip to your project or timeline and begin your A-roll cut down. So we'll keep talking a little bit more about this, but I wanted to trigger a poll, and the poll question is, how do you guys feel about the magnetic timeline? Do you love it? Kind of or do you hate it? I'm curious how you all feel about it. So this magnetic timeline method is just really, really powerful, I think, and it's a great way to make the later stages of your editing of your YouTube videos much easier and much more flow. Again, we're not copying and pasting all these attributes across multiple clips. We just pop into that multicam, make our adjustment in there, and we're good to go. And the same thing applies to your second angle. If you make some adjustments here, you add some color wheels, whatever, copy and paste those over here, and now your clips, color grade, audio, whatever is the same. Now, I never switched the audio of the second angle. I always keep it on this angle, so I don't apply my audio effects to the second one. But this, again, is just a really, really great way to make the A-roll editing portion of your video much easier. And again, the same thing applies for the EOS R. Because this is a synchronized clip, we can even double click in here. We've got all that audio synced to picture in the synchronized clip, and now we have it in here in the multicam. So again, all I would do is switch this to wide, and then I would change, I would add an angle. I would call that close. We can copy this and then just paste it. Oh, my bad. I got to make this the monitoring angle. And now we have both of those in the multicam. I'm going to go ahead and change the spatial conform. We're not going to spend too much time on this EOS R footage again, but just wanting to drive home that process of setting up a multicam for your A-roll edits. Let me just double check on the keynote. I think do we have our poll results? Okay, cool. All right, so it's interesting. We've got a nice little split here. We've got 50% of you say you love it, and then 50% saying, oh, it's fine. And one of the things that my YouTube channel is all about, part of my mission with Final Cut Pro, is the magnetic timeline. Just let's actually talk chat for a second. I'll switch to one. Here we go. The magnetic timeline to me is the single greatest feature of Final Cut Pro. The browser I love, the timeline index, how fast it renders, that hardware software collaboration, of course, that Apple brings, all that is great. But the magnetic timeline really transformed things for me when I was editing a little bit in Avid, but mostly in Final Cut Pro 7, 11 or so years ago. I've been Final Cut Pro really ever since. And I make a lot of videos on my channel that give tips about the magnetic timeline, so I highly recommend checking them out toward the end of the session. But I really, there's a lot of things that you can do to unlock the magnetic timeline and make it work with you instead of against you. And I really advocate for that a lot. Different modifiers you can do, keyboard shortcuts, different features that people don't even know about. And I could do, again, a whole session just on the magnetic timeline. Future video creator universities, that's an option. But I wanted to open things up. We took a look at this whole process. I think we've pretty much covered everything for setting up A-roll in Final Cut Pro. Hit me up with some questions. If you guys have any questions about templates, prepping a project, any issues that you see might come up in your workflow if you use the multicam method. Are there any questions that you have about having everything in a separate event? Why do you use the, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And feel free, to drop those in chat or actually put them into the Q&A panel down at the bottom of the presentation. But Dwayne, I see that you mentioned in chat, this part is amazing, being able to basically do that on everything. The copy and attributes, yes, is a pain in the butt. You don't want to be spending your time tracking that you have all the right attributes pasted across all your clips in the timeline. And that's something that can be really frustrating. We got a great question from Mark. Mark's asking, does voice isolation work in the multicam? And let me tell you, it sure does. And I use voice isolation for all of my audio. And I have to say, this is not just Apple fanboy, two-time employee Matt talking. I recorded a behind-the-scenes video for my YouTube members. And my air conditioning was running because it has been super hot here in Omaha, upper 90s. And when I record these BTS videos, if I turn the air conditioner off, it really heats the. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try voice isolation and check it out. So I ran voice isolation with the heater, with the AC running, and I did the BTS, and it eliminated the air conditioner. Now there were like the slightest little twinges of issues with of the distortion of my voice, but you could barely tell. It really was remarkable how well it worked. And I realized I was in full screen on that, guys. My apologies. But yeah, voice isolation in the multicam, you can apply it, make adjustments to it, and then when you go back out to your edit, it will apply it globally. So I'll give you a look at one of my recent videos. We can take a look at and I'll show you what one of my edits looks like using the multicam method. We'll go into the demo one just so if I screw anything up, we're not causing too many problems. We'll switch to this view. We'll scale this down a little bit. Let's go ahead and not show duplicate ranges just so it's not as visually that way. So let's go ahead and zoom in and let's kill the inspector. literally. I mean, we don't want to hurt the inspector. Ha ha, dad jokes. I am a father of two, so I'm getting to that age where you just roll out the dad joke. And then I don't know if you guys are going to hear audio on this. I don't know if there's levels for it,
8,
but
10 seconds. It's nice for a little dramatic.
So this is a recent video I did, and you can see I've got
subtle thing, but I think it helps keep the viewer
there's me and my main angle, right?
Extra.
Thanks, Tom. Glad you like the dad joke. And this might be a little small, so let me go ahead and I'll fit this. Sorry, y'all. And then you can see it just pops to that next angle. A little bit more dramatic. So and then we go to back to the screen recording. Now here's something that'll really melt your mind if any of you create tutorials in Final Cut Pro. If you create tutorials in Final Cut Pro, use the multicam method with your screen recording as a third angle. I do this with all of my screen recordings as a third angle so that I can make my base clip in the primary storyline my screen recording. Then I'll just duplicate this and pop it up. And then Dylan Bates, the Final Cut Bro, I don't know if you guys subscribe to Dylan Bates on YouTube, but he has an awesome effect through his Patreon called Picture in Picture. And all I have to do is drag, let's see if this will work. Yeah, we'll just do it on this one. Drag this picture in picture and it automatically puts it into the picture in picture look that I like. And then I make all my adjustments and I get it the background color that I like and the size that I like. And then what I do there, and make sure I'm not blocking, is I go to the effects panel. I got my picture in picture here, and then I save it as an effects preset, and we'll call this picture in picture Matthew, and this is in 360, which I don't want it in 360. What are we going to put this? I don't know. Yeah, we'll put it in the Final Cut Pro and save it. Now, if I want to put that on, and hopefully that worked actually, because I think yeah. Okay, cool. Now I've got double on here. We don't want that. So now when I put that effect on, it's just automatically the exact way that I want it. That's another little Final Cut Pro hack that you all can use. Oh yeah, so Mark, great question. Sync drift, our worst enemy. Mark's asking, screen record video from the iPhone doesn't always stay lined up with the main camera video as you go farther down the clip. Do you have that issue? I don't, because I don't do a lot of iPhone screen recording for my videos, but you're absolutely right. You're going to get sync drift there. And I can't remember if that's because the audio is recorded at a constant rate or a variable rate. But I've heard that a lot of people might sometimes run that audio through compressor or Handbrake with some different settings and then bring it back into Final Cut to get it so that the audio doesn't sync drift on them. But I apologize. I don't have like oh yeah, just do this. Just click this one button and it's solved. But this is something that comes up enough that I want to do some research on it to help people that don't use all the exact same methods that I use for creating my videos. But yeah, I just wanted to show you guys, how this multicam looks in action. And like I said, I use the keyboard shortcut Command Shift right arrow, and I can cycle those angles. If I want to quickly switch them from, coming out of this screen recording, let's say I want to be in the close and then go to the wide versus the wide and then go to the close. And again, I have those keyboard shortcuts, Command Shift right arrow and Command Shift left arrow, programmed to my Stream Deck mobile. I wish I had it here, but it's in my main edit bay. And I can literally just press one button and it switches the multicam angle. So Charles is asking, can you use your method of multicam with several cameras? Yeah, so let's say that you wanted 3 cameras. Here, I'm going to switch back to my main angle. Let's say that you wanted 3 cameras filming you doing something at your desk. You wanted the main angle on you, and you wanted a top-down angle, and then you wanted a wide shot that showed you working in your edit bay. Take all 3 of those clips, make a multicam out of them. Hopefully you have scratch audio on each of those cameras that's going to allow you to synchronize those clips using audio in Final Cut. And then you can use the multicam keyboard shortcut that I use to switch back and forth between those angles, or you can use the 1, 2, and 3 keys to automatically blade your clip and then switch the angle as well. What is I always forget what the keyboard shortcut is for uh, the multicam viewer. Command Shift 7? Yeah. So we'll switch back and we'll do some picture in picture. But let's do it bottom left. And yeah, you can see here the multicam view. Once you start getting many more angles, you might want to use the multicam viewer. I don't use this for my A-roll because I usually only have two angles in a screen recording. But you can also tell it up here, enable video and audio switching, enable video only switching. So I would use this with that method so that when I changed clips, it's not going to switch to the top-down camera's audio. It's not going to switch to the wide camera's audio. It's going to stay on that main audio that you want to preserve while you're making those multicam edits. But you can really use these powerful multicam tools in a very simple in a YouTube video in a very simple way to do some really powerful things up front that are time consuming, admittedly, but they will save you a lot of time later in the edit and again help you stay in the creative flow. And that's the most important thing that we want to keep track of. I could have sworn I had another poll. Let me just go through this real quick. Oh yeah, we did do all three. Yeah. Okay, good. So if anybody has any other questions, please drop them in. Chris, feel free to chime in. I know we're getting close to the end of the hour here with about 6 minutes left. So if there's anything that you wanted to do to tidy things up, I will go ahead and plug myself as far as social media goes real quick. If you want to keep the screen on me and just say, if you want to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Matthew T. O'Brien. On TikTok, I am at Midland Pictures. That's kind of a holdover from my old channel name. On YouTube, I'm youtube.com//C/Midland Pictures. Again, my channel used to be called Midland Pictures, but I switched it maybe a year ago to Matthew O'Brien. My vids on my YouTube channel are all about Final Cut Pro, filmmaking, and of course, Apple tech. So if those are topics that interest you, which I assume they are since you're part of Video Creator University, you can certainly check all of my stuff out there and join the Final Cut fam and the Broccoli Squad. And that would be awesome to have you. So yeah, Chris, feel free to, if there's anything that we want to do to kind of wind down, let me know. But that's what I've got going so far.
That was a terrific presentation. Thank you so much, Matt. We do have a few minutes if you have those last minute questions. Otherwise, we can wrap this up. And just on the schedule, Matthew, you have another session, I think, on Friday.
Correct.
So if you wanted to see more of what Matthew's got, be sure to check the schedule out.
Yeah, that one's going to be on mobile filmmaking, tech that's associated with mobile filmmaking. So if you're a YouTuber that uses your iPhone, what are some tools that you can use to help with that type of workflow?
Terrific.
Awesome.
Well, no questions, but a lot of thanks and a lot of love, I think, for this session. So
cool.
Opportunity to thank you, Matthew, and I'll thank you all for joining us. And we hope you